All right, everyone, welcome to the webinar. I'm going to hand it over to our lovely speakers today to get everything started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vinay Bhagat, CEO of TrustRadius, and joining me here today is Matt Heinz, President of Heinz Marketing. Matt, excited to have you here with us today on this webinar. Matt, would you like to just say a few words about yourself and Heinz Marketing? Matt, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I gotta go back off mute. And I'll apologize if you can hear the thundering herd above me as the Heinz homeschool continues to go off the rails here. My name is Matt Heinz. I started Heinz Marketing almost 12 years ago. Actually started it in November 2008 in the midst of another interesting moment in our economic history. Been spending a lot of time, of course, over the last couple weeks really helping companies think through go-to-market changes, pivots to the way that they're selling, figuring out how to ensure they're selling with empathy. And then for marketers, trying to figure out, okay, now that the trade show season is gone, how do we continue to build pipeline?
Great to have you here with us, Matt, and to hear your insights. And hello, everyone. I'm Vinay Bhagat. I'm founder and CEO of TrustRadius. I'm really passionate about how customer voice can help marketers get their message across more effectively with authenticity to cut through the noise. And I think this topic is even more relevant in a world where people are working from home, where they're spending more time online, and where trust is really the new currency. So excited to share some insights with you today and to share a lot of data that our team has captured in terms of buyer trends and behavior on our side as well. So let's talk about COVID-19, the big elephant in the room and how it's affecting our industry as marketers today. Matt, I'd love to hear from you first. You speak to a lot of B2B marketers. You have a lot of B2B marketing clients. Now, what's on their minds these days?
Well, it's a couple things. I think, there are certainly some industries that have been more affected than others. We have clients in hospitality and in travel, in events that have been hit pretty hard by this. I think all those will bounce back. It may take a while, but for a lot of software companies, it's interesting. I think, there was about 6 weeks ago as we started to see that this might sort of disrupt life as we know it and business as we know it. A lot of work stopped. A lot of people paused, and I think there was a period of a good 3-4 weeks where sort of there was this increasing just sort of almost sort of shock of what's going on, and people were just trying to sort of figure out how to get through the day. I've noticed though, literally over the last 10 to 14 days, and it really sort of pick up last week, where things are going to get probably a little worse with the pandemic before they get better. But I think businesses are realizing, okay, we got to deal with this. There's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And so adjusting to, I don't even think of it as work from home. I think of it more as at home during a crisis, trying to work. So I think, with our employees and with our clients, just giving them some empathy and grace around that is important. But honestly, I think we're seeing a lot of companies just say, okay, well, we got to keep going. We have to keep moving. We have to keep growing. We still have to serve our customers. We still have to find more customers. And just like any time, whether the markets are good or bad, you aren't going to sell something unless there's value in what you're selling, unless there's a reason why someone needs it. That's intensified now, but that need hasn't changed.
And it's even getting harder, right? So it's not just the dynamics of working from home. Events as a strategy for most companies has sort of gone out the door. A lot of companies are pivoting towards digital events, but in-person events where people used to go and network with each other and exchange ideas are no longer there. We're seeing a lot of marketing budgets get cut as well, but I don't believe pipeline goals are being cut by the same degree that budgets are being cut. So as marketers, I guess we need to all be more creative in terms of finding new sources of leads and being more efficient with the spend. Would you sort of say that's a fair fact, Matt?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of marketers lost their channel that we're going to do trade shows, but we didn't lose the value. We just lost the venue. So a lot of the companies that you were going to engage they still have a need. But I think replacing that with what now? Like if you're a company that was going to do a live event and you're replacing with a virtual event, it had better not be just a bunch of webinars, right? Because I mean, if you go to a 20,000 person event, and you go to the general session, you're sitting in the back, you can't see the stage, you're watching the show on the screen anyway. So why would I go if that's all I'm going to do? It's for other things. So yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of pivots on go-to-market. The other kind of, I guess, silver lining in all of this is the change to the show schedule, or change to what we can actually do in field marketing is requiring companies to do some exponential thinking, right? If you think about the difference between incremental thinking and innovation with your marketing, which might be, how do I get more people on my landing page? How do I get more people to my booth? Like, that's okay, that's just run a site. Now, if I think exponentially, like, well, what if a global pandemic canceled all business travel for a while? How am I going to go to market? And you could argue that we should have been thinking exponentially all along. Now we're kind of forced to. And so now we've gone from a place where everyone goes to certain shows to no one's going, but it's going to be replaced by something valuable. So this is an enormous opportunity for all companies to lean into this and say, how do I serve my audience? How do I provide something valuable, unique in this moment that is not only something you're going to look back on, 6-9 months from now and be proud of, but something that can maybe increase the value and output for your organization beyond what the traditional trade shows might have done.
And where do you think those innovations are really going to need to happen? What do you think are going to be the primary substitutes?
Well, I think we are going to see some innovation around online events. I don't think those are all going to be webinars. I've seen companies do sort of virtual happy hours, virtual breakfasts, just discussion groups with, a Zoom where you've got sort of your Brady Bunch version of everybody's picture, and it really kind of creates a discussion. The use of video in conference calls has increased exponentially, and so even though we're not sitting next to each other, even though we're not doing this on a stage somewhere, we still see each other, right? You can see when someone's smiling when they're talking, and so I think there's more of an impact there. I do think people are leaning into digital right now because people are spending more time in front of their computers, but I think that's going to get really crowded really quickly unless it even it may already have. Where I think people aren't thinking right now is just getting old school and saying, okay, what about phone calls and direct mail? I saw some stats a couple of days ago that indicated that connect rates on cold calls in the last 2 weeks have not changed. They continue to be in the 10 to 12% range. And I know this for myself. If my phone rings right now, not right now, but if my phone rings and I'm working from home and I don't recognize the number, like, I love my family, but they're the only people I see right now. So talking to someone else for a second might not be that bad.
You mean you would take a call from a BDR right now?
Not right now. Like, I'm busy right now, but like I'm a little more likely to pick up the call. And also direct mail is actually still working. I mean, I think some of the direct mail integrator companies have come up with interesting solutions around address verification. I think people are like, hey, sure, send me something home. I like getting mail. And like, I'm stuck at my house, put a package on my doorstep. I might let it sit there for 1 or 2 days just to let the coronavirus fall off of it. But I think that's still something of value. And I think being innovative doesn't always mean coming up with something new. Sometimes it means going back to things that have previously worked that might work better in the current circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, leaning into what you're saying, I do think we're seeing a lot more emphasis on digital. We ourselves have seen about 30% traffic growth to TrustRadius just in the last 30 days. Happy to announce that today we just eclipsed 1 million uniques on our site. So we're seeing just a lot more people spend time online, spend time in search, and spend time reading content. What about content strategies? What are people doing in the content arena to remain interesting when people are frankly in front of computers, perhaps even more than they were so before?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen data that shows that content consumption has gone up significantly. The one channel that seems to have suffered a little bit so far is podcasts. I think a lot of people were using their commutes for listening to podcasts, and so now that we're not on trains and in cars as much, that time is gone. Yes, we have that time back, but people aren't as likely to sit at their desk and listen to a podcast as they are to sit at their desk and watch a video, right? And a good video is something that can work in a lot of formats. You can play it without sound, and oftentimes a video will have sort of the captions underneath it. You can play it and listen to the audio and go, work on your email and just listen to it if it's got that kind of value as well. I mean, I could argue like even this webinar for someone listening to this on demand, we've got slides that we're walking through, but I think the talk track is where you really get the color and the richness. So yeah, I think investment in content right now, just because the consumption is going up, is significant. But this is also a huge opportunity to really think about the nature of that content. Like, how are you meeting your customers where they are right now? What are you doing to be of most use and most value to them? How are you creating content that in and of itself becomes a bit of an essential service to help either help your customers get through this, help them understand their options better, maybe sometimes just to entertain them as well? I think that can be a clear part of content as well. But I don't know. I mean, just like in any time, the better you understand your customers, the better you understand what they need. And right now, the better you understand how those buying journeys and some of those personas may have shifted or pivoted just a little bit, given what people are doing, is critically important.
One thing I don't think we need any more of is guides for working from home. I think the market's been saturated with those. I have seen some companies do some fairly creative things. Lessonly in the learning management space published a coloring book for children. Who knows if it'll drive to kind of the actions they want, but I thought it was creative and a way to kind of break through and be humorous and very human. We're also seeing companies kind of adapt their messaging. So I spoke recently to the CMO of Druva. We're going to be hosting a webinar with him in a couple of weeks, and they're relevant in this environment, but what they're doing is leaning into aspects of their value proposition that are even more relevant in this marketplace. One of their value props is we make it possible for you to do kind of remote support of your data center without having to go physically to the data center. And that's obviously a much more important value prop today than it was 30 days ago. And so the savvy marketers I'm seeing are saying, how do we become more relevant in this world? Let's unpack our 30 potential use cases and value props and really hone in on the ones that are most relevant today. Are you seeing that behavior as well?
Well, I'm seeing both, unfortunately. I mean, I do see companies that I think just, they're worried about hitting their number and seem to be doubling down on the same noisy messages where they say, here's the 40 things we can do for them. You, Mr. Customer, you, Mr. Prospect, read through this and figure out which one's most valuable to you. Look, I mean, let's face it, our attention spans are shorter right now. It's really hard to avoid refreshing the news and seeing what other terrible thing just happened. So we're less likely to dig through someone else's message if it doesn't resonate. We're more likely to delete an email that is from someone you don't know and leads with a message that just is either tone deaf to the moment or doesn't reflect what I care about. So I think you're right. I mean, this is a huge opportunity and really mandate to tighten your message. I used the phrase essential service before. And I think, we hear that term all the time now. Like if you're in lockdown, if your market or your city or your state is shelter in place, that means most places have closed. Most businesses have closed except for the essential services. And those stay open because we need them. We can't live without the grocery store, the pharmacy, even the hardware store. So if you think about your customers, and even if you're in B2B, how are you an essential business for them? How are you essential to them getting their job done? And it may not be your entire value prop, right? It may be something specific. It may be a couple of features that are particularly required right now, but connect the dots, make it really clear, tell the customer story about what they need to accomplish, what the outcome and success is for them. And then your product and service can become the hero, but make sure that you're figuring out how do I position that to the right companies right now as an essential service.
So let's run through some of the data that we've collected, and then we can come back to strategy. But I thought it was really interesting just to frame the conversation like that. So we've done a number of different surveys and data pulls from traffic on our site. Back on March 18th and 19th, we did a survey of almost 1,700 B2B tech buyers. And what we actually found is that about 40% of software buyers actually plan to increase spending during COVID-19. Now, a good chunk of that is probably related to enabling a new working environment. So categories like web conferencing, security software, remote access software, are all surging. A good chunk, 26%, said no change. So the macro kind of question for marketers is how should you react? How severely should you react to this? And depending on the sector that you're in, maybe the answer isn't to slash everything. Maybe yes, moderate, but think about how to again remain relevant when there is a sector of the market that is willing to spend on certain things that they consider vital during this time period.
I wonder if this has been part because this is not what we're facing right now is not an economy problem, it's a health problem, right?
Right.
So, 12 years ago, 2008, like that was an economic situation that it wasn't necessarily systemic, but it was something that really affected the economic health of the overall economy, as well as individual companies, and when they're, what they saw as their opportunity. So now all of a sudden we're working from home, not because the economy's in trouble, but because we've got this pandemic we're trying to slow down. It doesn't change the opportunity in the market for a lot of companies. And so look, I mean, like I run a small business as well. And so, I have to run the same projections of like, how's my demand? What's my cash look like? If demand goes down, am I going to have enough cash to pay the bills for the next 30, 60 days, whatever it is? So like, you have to think about that. And I think that the companies spending less are doing it not because they don't see the opportunity, but it could be because they aren't as well, they don't have the capitalization, they don't have the cash access. And so they're just trying to be conservative. That said, so I think I may have used this with you before. I mean, think about sort of the race car analogy, right? Like we've been on this straightaway going as fast as possible for a long time. We're in a curve right now. And if you're a race car driver in a curve, that's where the work is, right? You got to slow down. You make sure you don't hit the wall. You got to think about your position. But what good race car drivers know is that you actually win races in the curve. You win the race by accelerating before you hit the end of the curve. So marketers have two jobs right now. We have to recalibrate, slow down, not hit the wall, make sure we're making decisions for right now. But I look at the companies that are saying we're not going to change, and especially those things spending more, and I think they say this too will end. We are going to spend more. So as we get out of the curve, and I think we see a lot of buyers that are also indicating on the consumer and the B2B side, when this gets through, we are going to buy again. We're getting back business. We owe it to our economy, to our country, to everybody to sort of get back to work. And so I see that 40% in the middle here as these are companies that are ready to hit the gas pedal once they see the end of the curve.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say, to extend the race analogy, you hit the brakes before you hit the curve, so that there may be a immediate sort of budget halt, but then you start reinvesting on the things that, again, will pull you out of the curve as the economy starts to rise. So remote readiness is certainly part of it. About half the companies in our survey were already kind of prepared for remote, and a good chunk were. So some of the spend is certainly related to spend propensities related to kind of getting ready for remote, but there are other people who, again, are just are ready already, and the considerations they're having are more reflective on where they're going to spend in other areas as well. Let's move to the next slide. So on the topic of moving to remote, about 30% of people have been purchasing web and video conference software, but there's a lot of other things that you may not think of naturally as being kind of part of remote. Things like security has really stepped up, antivirus. In fact, last week, it may be a little bit ironic, but antivirus was the #1 fastest growing category on TrustRadius, I think, with several 100% growth. I wish it were that easy to find a cure. But again, just a lot of activity in a whole host of categories you wouldn't necessarily naturally think of as being the center of a work from home, benefiting from a work from home move like this, but we're seeing kind of a surge in a handful of categories. Let's keep going. In terms of investments post-pandemic, most people expect to return to normal post the pandemic. Again, 69% of buyers surveyed do expect their software spending to return to normal. What's your reaction to this data, Matt?
Well, we talked about this a couple of slides ago, that I think a lot of people say, listen, like we're going to get through this. We got to be careful through the curve. But yeah, we're planning on going back to normal. I look at that 30% that say no, and we don't necessarily know whether they say, well, we're going to go down, or maybe that's part of the 40% that says they're going to go up right now, right? And I think we also know that spend isn't always directly equated with sort of confidence and effort in the market. It could be that people are going to find more efficient ways of going to market during this period. Trade shows are real expensive, right? And so as much as people are upset that they've lost the venue of the shows and the field events this spring, a lot of other people have been like, well, I kind of hated those trade shows anyway. And they're really expensive and they're not very efficient, but everyone goes and it's our industries, yada yada. So are we going to find other channels, other efforts that can achieve the same outcome in terms of customer engagement, in terms of pipeline development, that aren't as expensive potentially? And would people spend then more money than they had before on some of those more efficient channels to get better output in terms of pipeline and marketing influence? Sure. So I look at this and I think this is a very, very positive sign of where the market expects us to go. I look at this and say, okay, hopefully, we can get our arms around this pandemic. And once we do, this will be more of a V than a curve in terms of getting back to, a healthy economy.
Yeah. We're also seeing in our data that the answer is different by tier of market, and it is clearly impacted by industry. So obviously certain industries like travel, hospitality have been hit super, super hard. But companies, larger companies seem to be a bit more resilient through these difficult times. In particular, enterprises, 2x the number of enterprises actually expect to increase investment versus decrease. Mid-sized companies are somewhere in the middle, and perhaps unsurprisingly, small businesses are the ones that are hardest impacted or the most skittish and the most reticent to spend. A lot of the companies I speak to in our customer base are seeing that they still have fairly healthy pipelines with large customers. Actually, a lot of them made their Q1 plans, mostly based upon kind of larger account businesses. Whereas at the lower end of the company size bands, that's where the market has frozen for them. Matt, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the smaller the organization, the more they may be likely to preserve cash and just say, listen, like there's more at stake. I want to make sure I can get through this. But you also see that, so you have 26% of them are saying less, which is a bigger number, but also by far they're the biggest group to say no change anticipated. So on one hand, you may have some of those smaller companies saying, we're gonna hibernate or slow down a little bit because it's not as big a deal for us to slow down. On the other hand, companies that may have cash availability or may say, listen, this isn't a cataclysmic event for us. We may see 20, 30% decline in demand or sales, but that's not going to kill the company. So let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's keep selling through this. And that means that we'll probably be stronger and better in the back half of this. I think it's entirely possible that some companies may say, listen, we may not have a good April. We may have a very slow at the beginning to Q2, but we might make up for it at the end of Q2, depending on the timing of how all this stuff goes. And so that's, for the smaller companies, and especially just having, being one myself, and also talking to a number of, sort of friends that are entrepreneurs in that category. And I guess we're not necessarily in the 1 to 10, but just, there's a sort of wait, there's a hunker down, make smart decisions, but also keep doing what you do well, so that by the end of the year, you're in much better shape to hit your number.
So I'd now like to do a quick audience poll. Please select one of the following. What is your number one marketing priority right now? Interesting. So enabling sales, number one at 38%, followed by updated messaging and then new lead sources. Matt, I would love to get your reactions to that.
I love seeing this. I love seeing this for a couple reasons. One, cutting non-essential spend was interesting that was at 0. And I guess we did say number one sort of marketing priority. So, I'm a little surprised, but also, that there was 0 there. Look, I mean, if you are going to have a constriction of budget, or if some of your channels go away and you're like, well, we're going to wait this out, what are you doing to increase the efficiency of your overall funnel? Figuring out how to improve collaboration between sales and marketing, figuring out how to increase throughput and consistency of that, both velocity and conversion, really important. And part and parcel with that, as we talked about earlier, is updated messaging, making sure that you are speaking to the moment, that you are not just selling, but selling with empathy. And that requires some thought. So I like that a lot.
Let's talk about how one should be thinking about enabling sales in this environment. What are your top kind of 1 to 3 recommendations for enabling sales?
Well, I think first is giving them an explicit strategy for how to talk to customers right now. And I have seen data that indicates that cold call volume and just outbound call volume has decreased dramatically over the last couple of weeks. That's clearly not because there isn't a need for companies to build pipeline and generate appointments. I think there's a reticence for people to call and be a little tone deaf in this moment, and maybe people worrying that, like, well, if I call the office number, I'm not going to get people connected. We've seen the data that says connection rates are still happening. So the challenge is, what do I say, right? So I think having a strategy for how to approach the call, how to ask questions about how are you doing, are you healthy, do you need anything, how are you, what's your best practice for working with kids at home. I make jokes about Heinz homeschool a lot in calls. But then also being really clear about what is it that you are offering your clients, not what am I selling them, but what am I creating? What do I have that can be a give to those prospects with nothing asked in return for this moment, right? And I think if you can come up with that tactical call strategy as well as those messages people can use, not only is that going to land better with your prospects that get called, but your sales reps will feel better about making those calls in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, just to share our own personal experience, our SDR channel came to a grinding halt like about a week ago. I mean, our numbers kind of fell through the floor in terms of outbound yield and our prospecting. And so we're trying to take sort of a very scientific approach and deconstruct everything from offer to subject line to copy to use of visuals to segmentation in terms of the types of companies we're going after with what message, to the titles we're going after with what message, and just trying to, frankly, I think it's just driven behavior that we should have been doing at this level before, but trying to say what are the 1 to 2 key learning objectives every 6 to 12 hours in terms of things we're going to test against our control.
Right.
And one of the offers that we've started to see good uptake on is offering a free sample of buyer intent data, where because we're a public site where, again, we have 1 million uniques on our site, we're tracking every company that has purchase intent based upon reading reviews, running product comparisons, searching product categories. And what we're finding, again, to your point about the offer, is that it's relevant today that people are seeking new lead sources and seeking ways to enable their sales team with high quality leads. And that offer is getting reception now, where our traditional messaging didn't. And because it's a new offer, we're changing some of the personas that we pursue. We're no longer kind of going after, say, a customer marketing persona. We're going after marketing ops or perhaps sales with that offer in mind. But we're starting to see a positive response to that. So that's just sort of a personal example of what we're trying to do to enable our prospecting team and provide sort of, again, a lot more real-time opportunities to kind of learn from those responses. And then we're also finding channel matters a great deal. We're seeing just a lot more responsiveness in the LinkedIn channel than in email right now. Email response rates have really, really fallen right at this period of time, interestingly. Any other thoughts in terms of things that you're seeing your companies do that are particularly kind of breakthrough?
Well, I think something we talk a lot about all the time, but especially important now. I think, I think we're all sick of getting the email from literally everybody that has ever done business with you, telling you what they're doing in this difficult time. I don't need my credit card to tell me how they're keeping me safe from a pandemic. And so that, it feels like a useless message, no matter what channel you use. So, back to the idea of like, what can you do that is valuable? What can you do that is actually useful for your customer? And I think, before you get into a sales conversation, if someone has an immediate need, then by all means go and talk about that. But how do you turn your sales and marketing from interruptive to irresistible? Like, how do you create something that is a welcome diversion from whatever else they've been facing all day? And that can be work related and it can be not work related. Like we've pivoted hard in our content to not only sort of, a lot of sort of written content, video content, interactive, sessions around, how to sell right now, but also just giving people a forum to share with each other. We do these Friday morning CMO coffee talks now that I know Russ on your team has been a part of, and it's been a great way for us just to create a venue for marketing leaders just to talk to each other, to ask each other questions, to share what's working and what's not working. And that is not a selling opportunity for us or anybody. But if you're the organization that puts together that content and makes that available, some people may be interested in buying now, and that's great. If they have a need, that's great. But you are building trust and credibility, and you're building brand value that is going to sustain you for a long time, well after we get past this moment in time.
So there's a question that came in. We've heard a lot of advice that says sales teams and BDRs should employ empathetic messaging when reaching out to prospects. But what does that really mean? What does that look like right now? Matt, would you like to comment on that?
So this is a question about best investments.
About no, a question about
Sorry.
people are getting advice that sales teams and BDRs need to be empathetic in their messaging. But what does that really mean? What does that really look like done right, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's a couple things. One, it is it's just addressing the elephant in the room. I think the data I saw a couple days ago that of calls that were being sort of recorded by some of the call recording tools in B2B right now, 100% reference COVID-19 or coronavirus. So I think simply asking people, how are you doing? How are you working through this? Just showing some empathy and saying like, hey, do you have kids? Like, what's your homework situation? Do you have any advice for me? Kind of thing. So I think that's part of it. I think also this is a moment to sort of pivot how well you understand your audience and not ask them what's keeping them up at night, but tell them what should, right, be keeping them up at night. Like to say, what I've noticed among CMOs right now is that there's 2 to 3 things that they're worried about, and list off those 3 things and say, did one of those just made you a little sweaty thinking about it? And I'm happy to offer advice of what I've heard other people say. Or is one of those something that you hadn't been thinking of, but now that you know that other CMOs are thinking about it, do you want to know why, right? And so it's just being just tactically empathetic about the moment and doing a little small talk, but then offering contextual advice and value and best practices for this moment. And if you uncover a specific need, then great. But in most cases right now, it's more about providing value, being generous, giving people something without asking in return.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this also applies to current customer communications. As B2B companies, one of the most important things we can do through a period like this is retain our existing customers. So one of the strategies that I've been doing and encouraging my team to do is to kind of construct, how can we help messages to our existing customers where we'll send out a message saying, here's what we're hearing, to your point. So it isn't just like what's keeping you up at night, but we're hearing people are cutting budgets, we're hearing lead sources have dried up, we're hearing there's a higher emphasis on conversion optimization, that messages have to be kind of dynamically changed. How can we help? Here are 2 or 3 ideas, and found people are very keen to kind of get on the phone and have a brainstorm. And this isn't about trying to expand someone's subscription, it's about trying to add value, brainstorm, and make sure that what we do remains hyper relevant to them in this time. On the updating messaging thing, one of the things that I'm seeing, again, some of my customers do is they've realized that certain parts of their market maybe are lighting up, certain segments, certain verticals are harder than before, certain use cases are more important than before to emphasize. So what they're doing is making sure they have customer evidence that backs up those claims. So literally with Druva, we're going to be running a campaign over the next 2 weeks to run a refresh campaign on all of their existing reviews to get them to update their messaging to talk about some new value props, and then go get new reviews that speak to these new use cases as well. I'd love to kind of get your reaction to that.
I think that's really smart. I think it's really smart. I think about the way that I used Zoom 3 weeks ago versus the way I'm using it now has certainly pivoted. The way I use Slack 3 weeks ago has certainly pivoted, as we now all are sort of working virtually and sort of using those kind of tools as our lifelines. So I think, it's a big opportunity if you are, for you to share with your peers how you are now using certain services, but also to understand how others are getting more value out of those tools. And again, it's not about, you mentioned this before, it's not about talking about all 40 value props, but maybe there's 1 or 2 features that in a normal environment were great, but now are necessary. And I think it's a huge reason why I think a lot of, why tools like TrustRadius are so important right now for people to be able to understand where best to pivot.
So these are the surging categories on TrustRadius right now. We're publishing this list every week, so stay tuned to our blog or to our LinkedIn channel to get these updates. Unsurprisingly, you see categories like telemedicine, web conferencing, and video platforms rising to the top there. But again, perhaps a bit less obvious: antivirus, mobile app development, live chat, VPN services. Some of these other categories are really surging too. And even categories like business intelligence that aren't above 100% are also growing, I'd say, above the median right now, which is kind of interesting to see. We would be happy to take requests from anyone in terms of additional data that they'd like in the industry. If there are other categories you want us to publish data on that impact you want to hear about your own category, or if you want to hear about products in categories, we're very happy to kind of provide this data to the marketplace and be a source for you guys during these times. Matt, anything you'd like to comment on this?
No, I mean, you look at these and you're kind of like, well, this totally makes sense, right? I mean, you would think that, you look at these and say, this is what you would expect in the business environment as well as in the current consumer environment. I think that the gap, and I know we've got data that shows some of those that are losing, some market share and interest right now. There's a gap in the middle, right, of things that aren't as obvious. So this is sort of natural request. This is sort of the stuff that totally makes sense. What are the non-obvious but equally necessary tools out there? What are the non-obvious but essential services that, people may not obviously think about that, but if they're not obviously thinking about it and it is essential, that's your messaging challenge. That's your opportunity to connect the dots for your prospects.
Right. Let's move to the next slide. Some surging products. I mean, again, NICE InContact Clone, which is a contact center solution. I'm imagining they have some features that allow them to kind of help businesses that need to run call centers in a distributed way. Don't know a ton about their product, but I imagine that's sort of something there. But off the chart growth that they should be happy with right now. Google Classroom, perhaps not unsurprising with all the kids at home right now. And then again, some other products in here that I don't know a lot about. IBM Mass 360. Again, a lot of products you'd expect to see, but again, interesting data just to see how some products are being more effective than others. Let's keep moving.
It is, and I think there's a number of other tools, sort of they're having their moment. I think, I used to ignore a bunch of the stuff on Nextdoor. Now it's been a great connection with our community, seeing who needs help, who needs us to pick up groceries for them. There are church management software tools that are having a moment right now as well. Like, most churches aren't meeting live, but many of them are still doing services online. You can do the Vimeo live stream, and then there's, how do you facilitate a community among the kids that were going to Sunday school? Like, there's tools for that as well that I think will last beyond sort of our inability to actually show up at church. But again, like, find your place, find what you can replace that people desperately want and need.
Right. One of the things that's also surging on our site right now is comparison activity. Again, UCaaS as a communications space, Ring Central versus Zoom, number one there as a comparison. HR software is pretty interesting to see. Maybe it is obvious when you think about it, but with, again, a workforce that's working differently, tracking that workforce in different now, so tools like Workforce Now, different ADP products really surging in terms of product comparisons as well. But it's just kind of interesting just to see buyer behavior. And we're seeing, again, just a lot of people coming to our site to get kind of high-level advice on which products should they even look at. Maybe they've heard of a brand like Zoom in video conferencing and they want to know if there's anyone else they should be looking at as well. And then again, people just trying to cut to the chase to kind of make a decision between two products that they're interested in right now. Any thoughts on this?
No, I think this is one of the reasons why I love tools like TrustRadius, just because it makes it so easy to see what other people are doing and not just look at one product, but sort of have one place where you can see multiple products in a category and see what your peers are saying about it. So I think this is just sort of a reflection of sort of the previous data on what people need right now, and seeing a surge in those comparisons tells me that these are categories where you have a lot more active buyers that are in that sort of decision-making process.
Yeah, and I think when you look at your own data as a brand, who you're being compared to can often be a really interesting set of insights, because you may
Right.
have a preconceived notion as to who your competitors are, but who your buyers compare you to may be non-obvious and different sometimes. And there may be learnings in there, again, in terms of how do you adapt your messaging or your positioning. You may be being compared to a product that's inherently complementary to you, and maybe you need to clarify to the market that it's complementary versus competitive. So again, there's lots of things to potentially unpack with this type of data. And again, we're happy to be a source of data to anyone who's interested in sort of digging in deeper. Let's advance. Yeah, and so there are some categories that are hurting in this marketplace right now. Banking software, perhaps unsurprisingly, with all the market volatility right now, is a sector that is declining. Event management software, again, unsurprisingly, has been a category that's really hurt as well. Products like SplashThat, Cvent, etc., are suffering right now in terms of market search volumes. Recruiting software, most companies are in hiring freezes right now. So products like Talent Reef. Talent Reef is a recruiting software that serves restaurants in particular, and certain industry sectors that are really hurt. So they're double hit, where no one's recruiting, and the core industry they sell to right now is really, really hurting as well. So it's really sad, but the data is kind of showing up in ways that you'd expect in terms of how different sectors of our economy are being impacted right now. And accounting, this one's a bit surprising, maybe a little bit non-obvious, but I guess tax deadlines have shifted. And so the surge in when someone has to file correlates to how much accounting software, particularly SMB accounting software for products like Intuit QuickBooks and Sage and Wave Accounting are selling right now. So again, data can tell you a lot of interesting patterns. So, we thought it's also interesting to share perspectives as to how marketers are reacting. I think the poll that we did earlier was really, really interesting to me. Again, the emphasis on enabling sales and messaging, as well as finding new lead sources. It was really interesting to hear. I had a hypothesis that finding new lead sources was going to be the #1 thing. Gartner also did a survey recently of marketers, and I believe it was B2B and B2C marketers. But the data suggests that about 65% of CMOs anticipate cutting their budget this year, and 63% anticipated an increased budget as of last year. So it's common to see people kind of take that knee-jerk reaction of breaking before the bend. The question is, where are they cutting, and where will they be spending, and how severe are those cuts? Matt, what's your reaction to this data?
It's a little contrary to what we saw earlier, I think, in terms of sort of what the market's telling us they want to do. I'd be curious, like, when they did this, because I think, things are changing kind of day to day these days. I think we certainly saw, as I mentioned, 4 weeks ago, the market was frozen. Like, this was all coming to a head pretty quickly. There was really no sense for how it was going to progress. Timelines were all up in the air. And I think at that point, people are like, oh, we really do have to sort of shut things down. I'm definitely hearing different energy in the market right now. I'm definitely hearing more people saying, you know what, like we're gonna change the way we go to market. We're gonna change our message. We're gonna change how we approach the right kind of customers, but we're gonna keep moving forward. So, I wonder if this was sort of one of those, done at the right time when people were freaking out moments. Because I certainly, it's heartening and almost a little surprising how many CMO conversations I'm having in the last, especially 5 days, people saying like, we're making adjustments, but giddy up, we're still going.
Yeah, and I think if we deconstruct the data a little bit, only 32% of this sample are actually saying they're doing a major budget cut of more than 15%. The vast majority are in that sort of, well, 27% no change to 5%, 33% 5 to 15%. So I think it's kind of like what we described, an apt analogy of hit the brakes before the bend, pause, rethink where that energy gets best invested. Events have gone away, digital's going up. Customer voice, I would argue, is an area of investment right now where you've got to kind of build that trust currency. But how do you make the right investments in your strategy, in your messaging, in your sales enablement to ride your way through the curve safely, overtake those competitors who make mismaneuvers, and accelerate out of that curve in pole position? I'm really liking this analogy. Let's move to the next slide. So this was a piece of data about what happened during the last recession, the financial crisis of 08-09, which was a true market-driven financial crisis, obviously different to COVID-19. That's caused, an unprecedented stock market crash. But again, the economy was fundamentally healthy pre-COVID-19, and it's a health issue, not a core financial issue at its core. But what happened was that consumer advertising plummeted after the last recession. Now B2B marketer advertising, I don't have data on that. But I think the lesson in this data is, if you look at consumer spending and the percentage decrease versus the percentage decrease in ad spending, I would argue that marketers perhaps overcorrected during that period of time. I'd like to get your perception though, Matt.
Well, it's interesting. There was an article in Ad Age this morning that indicated that consumers are ready to start spending again once this is over. And I think it'll be interesting to see how long the shutdown continues, how long we have people that are unemployed. I mean, I think there was another notice this morning of just another record number of unemployment benefit applications from last week. But there are companies that are surging. Amazon, grocery stores, essential services are trying to hire like crazy. So if you were a bartender last month, maybe you spend the next week, delivering to-go orders and working at the grocery store and work for Amazon, then you get back to your regular job. So I think the consumer spending and the consumer confidence in what they want to do after this is still apparently pretty strong. So it is interesting to see some of these trends on the ad spending side. I get it, but if your product has a value, that value likely still exists in a lot of markets. And if you're just going to cut it out, it's going to be a lot harder to get it back. And if the market rebounds quickly, if we see a V here, and I don't mean a V next week, but if we see a V back to a healthy and active economy beginning of Q3, and you have to go negotiate to get your ad spending back, and now you're behind, and now your competitors are advertising where you used to be, that's going to be a problem for a lot longer than we're going to have this health problem, is my guess. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons, and there's risk on both sides, but I think you have to be careful not to go too far.
Yeah, I just heard from one of my team members that a large B2B tech company that we work with has basically paused all social ad spending right now. And this is a very large tech company. They're keeping their Google pay-per-click work, but they've paused all social advertising on venues like LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And I guess the risk of that is overcorrecting again, right? The markets aren't evaporating, the markets aren't drying up right now. They are maybe pausing or slowing down. You don't want to overcorrect. Arguably, it's probably a buying opportunity for ad spend right now. I bet ad rates are dropping. When demand goes down, supply is still there. Might be a good time to kind of actually buy in this environment. The other thing I will say though is that companies also should be thinking about conversion optimization. I think they should be thinking about conversion optimization at all points in time. But if your budgets are being cut and your growth targets for pipeline are still flat or not cut as much, you've got to do everything you can to squeeze juice out of that orange right now, which can be mindful about conversion optimization. Would love to just chat to you about what you see in that whole area of conversion optimization as opportunities.
I completely agree with you. I think that in flush markets, when you have budget, when things are going well, it's easy to get lazy. And it's easy just to spend your way towards your results. Okay, I need to hit a bigger pipeline number. Instead of making my message more effective, let me just send it to more people, right? Instead of helping to improve the integration between sales and marketing to increase your conversion rate on those leads into opportunities, let's just send them more opportunities, or let's send them more leads, right? And so I think, when the budget constrains, you have fewer options, so you kind of have to focus on that. But I think responsible marketers are thinking about that on a regular basis. I think this is also where, hopefully out of this, we also see a greater volume of marketers that start focusing less on MQLs and more on SQLs, less on people filling out forms and more on active, qualified in-market opportunities with accounts, not necessarily leads. So, those marketers that are already focused on pipeline contribution are thinking a lot more about that conversion rate optimization, which is more than just landing pages. But yeah, I think a lot more companies are going to be forced to do that now, because that's how they're going to have to get more value out of what they have.
Yeah, and even kind of going up the funnel a little bit more, I think a lot of people focus on sort of audience and clicks to their site, and don't put enough time spending time on doing that kind of landing form optimization. One simple strategy that I don't see many companies do is just use social proof effectively on landing pages. We found that adding a review syndication widget to a landing page can drive a lift in conversion. 8x8 in the unified communication space is seeing about 150% lift in conversion by having kind of a dynamic widget feed to that page and making sure that the content is contextualized. So is it an industry page where you want people from the same industry showing up? Is it a compete page where you want to have people who talk about switching from a competitive product? Is it a regional page where you want people from that country? So the idea of using data points, stories, and sound bites from people just like them can lead to a material lifting conversion. The other area that I see a lot of interest in right now is around intent data. Would love to hear your perspectives in terms of where intent data now plays a role in this market, where people are looking for alternative lead sources. And to your point, it's about finding in-market leads versus just form fills.
Well, I think we've certainly seen, independent of the last couple months, more companies try to put a focus on accounts versus leads, knowing that there are still people we need to talk to, but the buying committee has to build consensus for the account to be able to make a decision to say yes. And so those, signals beyond just did someone download my white paper are being seen as better indicators of whether someone's interested in moving forward. So, your ability to measure account engagement, not just lead engagement, becomes more and more important. And looking at that beyond just what they did with your content and on your website gives you a more complete, more accurate, more comprehensive picture. So that intent data becomes critically important, right? And especially now, there are going to be companies that are distracted and not interested in your sales messages. There are going to be industries that are hurting, that are going to need some time. But if you can have a better picture of the overall intent and activity inside and outside your company of what's going on, you're going to talk to the right companies. I talked earlier about sort of having, selling with empathy and coming with value. You have to also do that with people that are willing to listen, people that are willing to talk to you. And the more you can do it with a finite set of companies right now, based on their lean in to you or their lean in on the problem, you're going to be much more likely to get conversion out of those efforts.
Yeah, we've kind of leaned into two strategies as a company in terms of how we serve our customers. We provide a service called category retargeting, where let's say a given company might have 3% of the audience in a given category. They can certainly do broad brush persona-based marketing in social channels, but they're much better off actually taking a data feed that says, here are all the individuals that are actually in market right now. 3% of them are looking at your products, 97% are looking at competitors, and double down on your ad spend against those in-market buyers at an individual level. So it's Matt at Acme doing the research. That's one strategy. And then leading people to a contextualized lead form that says, we know you're in market, you may not be looking at us, but here's our value prop in the market. The other strategy is, of course, doing figuring out which brands are in market right now, and then doing surround ABM type marketing to them, or sending them to your SDR team to do outbound research. But again, in a market where it's really critical to find out who's in market and to get more leverage out of every ad dollar you spend or every hour an SDR spends, getting more pointed in your strategy, both with targeting and with messaging, is critically important in these times. So we've got a few minutes left here. Maybe what's appropriate to do is to see if there are any kind of questions from the audience, and start moving to kind of a wrap up. Do we have any questions? Let's see. What are some of the most strategic investments in software and marketing spend at this time? I think we've talked about some of these, but Matt, maybe give kind of your recap of some of the most strategic investments people could be making in software and marketing spend at this time.
Well, I mean, I think the real answer to that is going to be unique for every company, depending on sort of their needs and their customer and their situation. But I would say a couple things. One, your customer community is critical right now. So in whatever you can do to get that community together to deliver more value for that community. I see a lot of CMOs finally pivoting to spend more time and energy on customer marketing in general right now, and so the tools that can help you support that, I think, are going to be critically important. I think similarly, your ability to maintain a community and productivity with your sales and marketing teams is really important. When you've got an SDR team working remotely, you can give them tools like outreach and sales off. That's fine. But, you just lost the energy of the sales floor. So what are you going to do stand-ups? What are you going to do to maintain some level of connectiveness with your sales team without, getting into their productivity? And I think I'm also seeing a lot of companies use this period to invest in non-lead systems, to look at the opportunity to say, you mentioned intent data, I think is an important one. Sales engagement, if you're not doing that yet, it's an important one. I think, anything around account engagement, to be able to sort of orchestrate how well you're speaking to accounts. These are things that most companies have needed for a while, but have been focused on the trade show schedule and been focused on, spending their budget and driving new leads. Well, now's a great time to improve the efficacy of the actual pipeline program you've got internally, to not only increase conversion rate and engagement now, but also to have that in place for when we hit the gas pedal again, to increase yield from all those new leads you're going to generate down the road.
And this is going to sound self-serving, but I believe voice of customer is more important than ever. You need to be listening to your customers and being really, really close to them during this point in time and understanding how they're challenged right now. So, customer communications, customer empathy, but listening, hearing their feedback, and then also capturing that content to use in sales and marketing for several ends. One is to make sure your public reputation is serving you well out there on sites like ours. But two, to then repurpose that content for conversion optimization and for sales enablement. Again, syndicating review content to a landing page can improve conversion 20, 30% or more. Enabling sales to use the content can give them tools for trust where they can no longer meet face-to-face. And remember, your buyers crave insights from their peers. A new report from Demand Gen Report suggested that the #1 most trusted or source they give credence to above analyst reports and vendor branded content was peer-generated content. So use it. Don't just let it live out there on the web. Make sure you're using it in your own channels. One last question, Matt. This one's a good one for you. What is your thought on restarting content marketing automation campaigns, not a sales or marketing message, but strictly helpful industry content?
I have noticed in the last week that business as usual content is being very well received. I had a CMO tell me that she did an A/B test on subject lines, and a couple of them referenced coronavirus or pandemic, and one of them, just was business as usual. The business as usual one generated the best response. So I think, there's selling with empathy, there's addressing the moment, there's being, aware of the moment. But I think that, again, if you've got a really strong message, if you've figured out how to be an essential service, that message can still land successfully. I would highly recommend companies do go through and do an inventory of your active drip campaigns, your active automated content. This is in your marketing automation system as well as what might be in SalesLoft and Outreach. Most of that content's probably fine, but if you have something that says, so how are your goals for 2020 going? That's going to make it sound dumb, right? And so, just do the sniff test, the common sense test on some of that content. If you haven't done that yet, do it today, because there's campaigns going out probably to prospects that just, some prospects might sort of understand, like, oh yeah, that's probably something automated, but you get outside the marketing or the tech industry, and I think it's just not going to land very well.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us here today. I think either one of us would be happy to kind of engage with you in this conversation over social, on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to also email me, Vinay@TrustRadius.com, if you have any kind of questions you'd like to ask. And then just a couple of housekeeping notes. We have a webinar coming up in a couple of weeks on the topic of adapting to market changes with customer voice, featuring Thomas Bean, the CMO of Druva, really savvy, progressive CMO who's been CMO of several companies now. It's going to be lending his insights, and I think will be a good follow-on to this topic. And then again, if you'd like a free sample of intent data for your company category, we'd be happy to offer that up to you. And if there are any cuts on the data that you've seen today, specific to your product or category that you'd like to see, happy to offer those up as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt. Real pleasure to have you on today, and look forward to chatting in the future.
Good. Thank you.